Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Secret Sauce of Selling podcast, the ultimate guide and sales gym to unlocking the secrets of successful selling. I'm your host, James Abraham, and on my mission to empower the best generation of sales professionals and business leaders the world has ever seen. And I'm excited to be here with you today with Greg Orth to share insights, tactics, and strategies to help you take your sales performance and sales leadership game to the next level. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, James. Glad to be here.
And today we're talking about DISC. We're talking about behavioral styles. Why don't you unpack that for our listeners, for those who might know a little bit about it and those who've never heard about it ever?
So, behavioral styles, at the end of the day, it's human behavior, it's human psychology, right? We spend 70% of our day, at least the time that we're awake, communicating in some fashion. Could be giving information, could be receiving information, but we spend the bulk of our day communicating. And that's at work and at home, right? Because we're around people all the time. So it kind of makes sense that the more that we can understand about general human behavior, um, dynamics, communication patterns, communication preferences, the more that we're able to understand that, the better communicators that we'll be. And then ultimately we'll be more successful in whatever we're trying to do. And then obviously in this case, James, we're talking about selling.
And so can I, with your permission, may I dummy up on this?
Of course.
Why is communication and behavioral styles so important for selling?
Great question. At the end of the day, we've got to, we have to adapt to whoever we're talking to, right? And so the reason why it's so important to understand human behavior, behavioral styles, what makes people tick, is because if we just go in with a single shot approach of how we want to do things or how we want to get things done, we're so limiting our success, right? But when I have an idea of how people prefer to communicate, what is their style, what makes them the most comfortable, I want to make sure that I communicate with them in a way that's going to make them comfortable. Because if they feel any level of higher anxiety or stress or any sort of potential conflict, the natural reaction is fight, flight, or freeze. And so I don't want that to happen. I want the other person I'm talking to feel as comfortable as possible. I want them to feel okay. But without having the intentional awareness around behavioral styles, I might just be going after it just because that's what I think I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're talking about DISC as a way to gain awareness, gain insight. How would you communicate to our listeners how DISC can be a powerful tool to help them sell better?
Sure. And so whether it's DISC or Myers-Briggs, Colby, predictive index, whatever there's a number of assessments that are out there that really get to the same information, but it's really understanding, again, what is the person's preferred behavioral style, which is another word for saying, how do you prefer to communicate, right? We at Sandler, as you know, we use DISC, and DISC is really around 4 styles, DIS and C. And it really breaks it down and, from are people more task oriented? Or are they more people oriented? And are they more extroverted or introverted? Those are basically the four quadrants and grids of DISC. Because each of those scenarios is going to impact what somebody may or may not say, or how somebody may or may not act or behave, depending on what their style is. And so I need to try to understand the best of my ability, the person I'm talking to, what their style is, incorporate that into my mindset, and then have that impact what I say or do, and how do I adapt to that person. Because at the end of the day, James, if you're feeling uncomfortable, you're going to be closed off. You're not going to be as open. You're not going to be as honest. You're not going to be as comfortable. You're going to be apprehensive. Well, that's not going to benefit anybody in anything that we do, whether it's sales or not, right? But if you're feeling comfortable, you feel somewhat safe, and you don't feel threatened or overwhelmed, you're going to be much more honest, much more open, much more willing to talk to me, and again, with whatever it is we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I love DISC, and when I work around enhancing communication, and communication takes a lot of energy. It takes
Yes.
our energy, and everyone's hardwired in a different way. And for some people, they have a high level of energy when it means being more extroverted, and others when it means being more introverted. And it takes a lot of energy to be extroverted for those who are introverted, and vice versa. And one of the ways I like to explain the concept when it comes to this, and I think also remind myself, is We talk a lot of matching and mirroring in sales, and what I like about DISC, it's what I call high precision subconscious matching and mirroring. What does that mean?
Hold
Five
on.
percent of what.
High precision subconscious matching and mirroring. All right, I might have to steal that.
Yep, you got it. And what do I mean by that? So we got, 5% of what we do comes from our conscious mind, and 95% of what we do comes from our subconscious. That means everyone out there, if you think about it, is on autopilot. We're all doing things out of a habit, right?
Sure.
And so if we're hardwired 95% in a certain way, and we're getting in front of someone else, we got to make sure that their subconscious feels comfortable with our subconscious. If that makes any sense here. So how do we do that? Basically, we match and mirror how they behave from a subconscious perspective. And I know that concept can be a little bit difficult to wrap their head around, but
Sure.
Greg, why don't we dive in each one of the styles for a second and talk about each style and share some insights of what they are, what they mean, and how we can actually leverage matching and mirroring to
Sure.
communicate more effectively.
Before we do that, though, James, you said something very important there that something to point out here before we talk about the four styles. We've all heard the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, or basically treat others the way that you want to be treated. Right? Treat others the way that you want to be treated. That's not what we want to do. It's not about me. It's about the other person. And so then what we look at, and this is not my phrase. I didn't come up with it. I don't remember who did it, but it's called the platinum rule. Right? The platinum rule is treat others the way that they want to be treated.
Mm.
Right? So when we talk about this high level subconscious matching mirroring kind of thing, that's what we're trying to do. I'm trying to treat people the way that they want to be treated. So those two subconscious minds do connect with each other. Right? And it's a powerful, powerful thing, but it's not about us. It's about them. And when we put all the focus on the other person with intentionality, then this is where the magic happens, especially
So
when we talk
what
about
you're saying is before you even start using DISC, put your ego aside, because a lot of people go in there and is like, I want to run the show my way, but that doesn't work because will come across as a jerk. So I know I've come across as a jerk quite a
right.
few times in my selling career.
Well, and you bring up another great point, James. Ego should not exist. If ego exists, you more or less cannot leverage DISC because ego is a person focused on themselves. When we talk about effective communication, when we talk about sales, when we talk about leadership, if we put the lens of leadership in this, it has nothing to do with me. Everything has to be done with the other person, right? So anybody that has an ego, I tell you right now, you better get rid of it because you will not be able to leverage this kind of information. Now, there's a huge difference, James, between an ego and confidence. We must
Mm.
all have the inner confidence, which goes back to IR theory, which we won't talk about here today, right? But we all have to have the inner confidence. But that's just about who we are internally. So ego's got to get out the door. Otherwise, none of this stuff will work.
So what you're saying is, if you're confident enough, you're okay putting your ego aside and adapting to the necessary DISC style to make your prospect, buyer, or customer feel more comfortable. And by the way, this is a managerial tool as well. Make the other side
100.
feel more comfortable so that you can communicate more effectively with them and help them solve the problem that they're
Absolutely.
encountering. I love it.
Absolutely. Right.
Let's
So
dive into them. Let's
we think,
start.
yep. If we think about the four disc styles, and I'm just going to, if you can visualize four quadrants, I'm in an upper right hand corner quadrant, and we'll talk about the D style. The D style is a task oriented person. Doesn't mean they don't like people. It's just their first instinct at hand is about the task that's going on. The what? What are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? What am I trying to accomplish? What is my team trying to accomplish? What are our goals? But they're also on the extroverted side, right? So it's an extroverted, task-oriented person, kind of just typically very independent, very competitive, very high-level, big picture results kind of person. Um, it's really about themselves. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just about themselves and what they're trying to accomplish and do, or what their team or their company or their division is trying to accomplish and do. Um, and, we've got to understand they've got different dynamics that we have to, again, adapt to. You've got an I style person, which is, if you're thinking the quadrant, lower right hand side, they're an extroverted person, but people oriented. This is your social butterfly, right? This is that person that's just going to put them in a room full of 100 people and they will shake hands and kiss babies all night long and they will be absolutely ecstatically happy, right? Usually a bit kind of all over the place sometimes, but very, wears their emotion on their sleeve, very talkative, very spontaneous, all those kind of good things. They're a people pleaser, right? They want to be part of the cool kids club and they want to be involved in things that are going on, right? Then we've got the S style person, lower left hand side. people oriented, but introverted. I call this like your steady Eddie, just very calm, cool, collected. It's all about procedure, routine, stability, trust, right? Just really having that, and they really think about the how of things. So just steps, process, procedure, and hey, if it's not broke, we don't need to fix it, right? So let's keep moving on the way that we're moving on, right? It's kind of comfort zoney kind of person in this S style, right? And then you go up to the C style, upper left, and now you're back up to task oriented, introverted. This is your uber precise, analytical, black, white, right, wrong kind of person. Um, Kind of just let me go, let me do my thing, don't bother me, let me just get stuff done, and let me overanalyze things and really strive for perfection and getting things right. Kind of like a typical accountant type mindset of just very much in the data and the detail of things.
Excellent. So you've given us the good about, and we're talking about, guys, I want listeners, I want you to think about your buyers, your prospects, your customers. Okay. I want you to think a little bit about how they're described. And Greg gave a great idea of the great stuff that, how their style is, and how they, Greg, can I do something cheeky?
Yeah,
Can I talk
I guess
about the
so.
bad? Can I talk
Of
about the
course you
bad?
can. Well,
Okay. How about the
go,
ugly? Can you do all the ugly too?
all right. Well, so define what you mean by that, because I think I know where
All
you're
right.
going, but
Well,
give
here's
me
the
more.
thing. Sellers tell me, James, why do my buyers do what they do? And they don't mean the good stuff. They don't mean the good stuff. So, I mean,
Give
let's
me an
talk a little bit
example.
about, come again?
I said, give me an example.
Well, let's talk about D's. Let's talk about the more dominance. How do dominance make sellers feel a little uncomfortable? Because sellers want to, at the end of the day, they want to get their message across. They want decisions being made. They want their prospects buying from them. And I find that sellers, because they lack that knowledge on this, they usually fall into the traps of that behavioral misalignment, if you may, or
Sure,
communication
sure.
misalignment. I like to use birds as an example for disc. Your D's are your eagles, your I's are your parrots, your S's are your doves, and your C's are your owls. And if you think about it, if someone's an S or a steady relator or a dove, and he's going to go and try and sell to an eagle, to a D, what's that conversation going to look like? And vice versa.
Well, you bring up an interesting point here, right? Because this is something that we do, which we need to stop doing, and that is kind of labeling and stereotyping people based on their disc style.
Mm,
We do it often, but we shouldn't. And when we think about some of those conflicts that we have, James, it's because an S might be trying to communicate with a D. They're polar opposite, right? But they can be such a beautiful combination because it's a yin and a yang. But without that level of awareness, right? Without being conscious of understanding some of these dynamics, I'm just going to go in talking like an S and they're going to continue to talk like a D and it's going to create this, right? That's not good
yeah.
for anybody. So that's why being intentional with understanding this information and then leveraging it in our conversations, we can pretty much avoid a lot of, or significantly reduce a lot of conflict just by our openness and understanding of the styles and how do I adapt to it, right? And you talk about D's, and I think they get the worst rap. D's get the worst rap when it comes to disc. Some of the mislabels and stereotypes is, oh, a D person doesn't care about anybody. They're so aggressive. They're a control freak. They're not a
I
team
love
player,
I love D's. They're
right?
my favorite prospect.
They really
They,
are. But if
they're
you
the
don't
easiest.
understand this dynamic of them, people take it personally. It's
Yep.
not fair. These get a bad rap. It's just a matter of they communicate differently than other people potentially. So
Yep.
when I know that, I can't get offended by it. That's just that's how they prefer to communicate. And I'll tell you what, you get to a no or a yes much quicker with a D than pretty much anybody else.
Yeah.
Right?
Moreover, D's will usually say no. They'll start with no
Right.
because that's how they're hardwired. And guess what? Do you know what comes after the word no?
Yes.
Exactly. So no is our second favorite word. Why not get it out?
Absolutely.
That's why D's are great, and they do make decisions, and they are decisive. Yes, they can be a little uncomfortable and overwhelming to deal with at the beginning. It's only because they really care about the bottom line, and
Right.
they're open about it. So I agree 100%. So tell me a little bit about, let's unpack this for a second. Let's talk about the different buying personas for the listeners out there, those who don't know disc very well. Let's talk about how they can identify the different disc styles and what really differentiates each disc style on their buying journey. So we talked about D's. Let's talk about I's for a second. what do eyes typically do? I mean, how do we see eyes communicating in a sales process, and what should we look out for?
So, I mean, similar thing when we talk about the eye, it's a social butterfly person, right? They're people pleasers. They want to be liked. They have a high need for approval, which is all great. So when we think about, well, and then we also have to understand the labels and misperceptions around the eyes too, because while I'd say D's get the worst rap, all four distiles get a bad rap when it comes to some of these stereotypes that we put upon them. So when we think about some of the stereotypes with the eye too, it's, oh, they're a jokester. They're just a goofball because they're just always distracted and they're just making jokes and having fun. They're too
Yeah.
emotional. They can't focus. Blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, those are all very important things for us to know that could be how they might communicate, but we can't assume that to be the case. But what we
Mm,
have to know from a buying perspective is that I wants to please people. So they're going to be thinking about their team. They're going to be thinking about the people involved in their buying decisions and how it impacts people. Not that they don't care about the numbers or the bottom line, like we said about the D, but their first instinct is going to be about the people involved and how good do they look through this process. Are they going to be pleasing their boss? Or are they going to be getting some accolades because of what they may or may not be doing? And those are things that we've got to take into consideration when we're selling and talking to an eye.
you're very adult when it comes to disc. I did notice that a lot of people do label disc styles, and I've noticed that for you, you're like, there's no good or bad. It is what it is. And we need to really just make sure that we level out and make everyone feel comfortable. And I think one of the things that come to mind is I think a lot of people sometimes don't feel comfortable with themselves and with their own disc style, and then they do look for. Does that make any sense?
Oh, absolutely. And so when we look at disc and leveraging disc as a tool, this isn't just a fun little thing. This is a serious, in my opinion, it's a life changing tool that can help us personally and professionally. Like it can be a game changer, right? If you allow it, but you got to agree in it, you got to understand it, agree with it, and really say, hey, this is something that I can use. Um, and so it's just important that we understand that, again, there are three parts. The first part of leveraging disc is just knowing yourself, right? You just kind of mentioned it. Know who you are, know what makes you tick, but also recognize that you just mentioned it. There's no good, bad, right, or wrong with this. You are who you are. Own it, love it, embrace it, live it, and don't want to be anything else. Unfortunately, I'll hear people say, "Oh, I wish I had more D," or "I wish I had more C," or no. You are who you are, and love it. It's fantastic, right? Once we get past ourselves, because again, when we talk about communicating with others, it doesn't matter who I am. I do need to know myself, right? But then the second part is I got to identify somebody else's style, right? And
Yeah.
then the third part is, and this is really where the rubber meets the road, is then how do I adapt? Once I identify, so if I meet you, James, I got to try to guess what I think your style is. I may have 10 seconds worth of information. I may have 10 years worth of information, depending on how long I know you, but I've got to come up with some sort of guess of what style I think you are. Then once I do that, then the third piece, again, this is really where things start to operationalize, is then how do I adapt, right? Once I get or understand or guess what your style is, okay, now how do I adapt to you to communicate the way that you want to be communicated with?
Yeah. Absolutely. And then one thing that pops to mind is, there are a lot of cognitive biases we have when we communicate with people, new people, and those cognitive biases subconsciously make us make decisions with regards to how we perceive the other side. And I'm not going to go into the
Yes.
details, but I'm sure every listener out there can knows what I'm talking about. And so DISC gives us the ability to really lean on some science to start to rationalize that level of communication. Which brings me to the S's. So we did the D's, we did the I's. Tell me about the S buyers.
So again, we talk about the S buyer, and again, I just use the term steady Eddie. Very much just it's about routine, it's about process, it's about procedure, it's about comfort, right? So just kind of, hey, if we everything we do is a process, right? In our life, everything we do is a process, and so for S's, it's very much about understanding the how. So what are the steps? What are the pieces? What are the parts? I want to see the big picture, and I didn't want to know. I need to know all the pieces and parts involved. I may not be the one responsible for it, but I need to see all of it to know where things lie and where things fall. And so if I'm working with an S, I've got to make sure I am completely giving them the whole picture, everything involved, whether it's their responsibility or not, so they can see where it all falls and what their role is. Um, you know, one other thing about S is they process things much more cerebrally, right? So they are not as, they're not going to be as vocal as a D or an I in a conversation because they're as they're going through a meeting, they're processing things very cerebrally, very internally. And so sometimes they come off as maybe not caring or not paying as much attention, but they absolutely are. It's just happening up here. It's just not vocal like you might get from a D or an I. And so we've got to understand that with an S. And we need to make sure where we have the ability that we give them time to process. Am I slowing myself down a little bit to make sure that I'm not talking way too fast because they're half a second behind, still trying to catch up on things. And I also don't want to force them into a decision they're not ready to make.
Yeah.
And so if I know I'm working with a high S, I need to make sure that I'm slowing myself down. I give us ample time, but I also give them ample time to gather the things that they need to be able to make a decision that's going to benefit them the best.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. S is, at the end of the day, sometimes it takes them longer to make a decision or feel more comfortable with a decision than a D, for example. And so we really need to sometimes slow down. And a lot of sellers out there just want to they want a decision. They can become pushy. And,
Sure.
if you're listening to this podcast right now and you have a bunch of opportunities for some reason that you feel you're putting too much pressure and they're struggling, this might be the case. So sometimes we really just need to sit. And I also find that setting really good, strong upfront contracts with S's, really kind of explaining the process, asking them if they've ever been involved in purchasing like something like this before, or asking a presumptive question regarding when was the last time that they did something like this before, what did it look like, really takes away that pressure. And I love also using with us is the whole pressure thing. Look, a lot of times companies, like prospects like you, when they reach out to us, they feel that there's a lot of pressure for them to make a decision. My job is to relieve the pressure here. Feel free to say no to me at any point if you feel that's necessary.
Well, and
And I think,
you bring up the upfront contract, James, and with the S on an upfront contract, in my opinion, in addition to the agenda parts of what's going to take place in this meeting, one of the most important things for an S is the outcome piece, right? What is the decision that has to get made today, and how can we make that as easy of a decision for them, right? So I will often say, hey, listen, James, at the end of our conversation, really the only decision that needs to be made is if you and I would like to continue this conversation or not.
mm,
Now, we're hopefully going to get into a lot more detail of things and stuff in our meeting, but I'm just giving you that comfort that says the only decision is if we want to continue the conversation or not. And if it's not the case, shake hands, we'll part ways, no problem. Feel free to tell me no at any point in time. But if it is the case, James will get out our calendars. We'll figure out what that next appointment looks like, what time it's going to happen, what it's going to look like.
yeah,
That's the only
absolutely.
decision that needs to be made. That then gives them up front the piece. I'm like, okay, I can do that one, right? Now, hopefully, again, we get into some more deeper stuff in there, but I've let them know that's the only decision that needs to be made, and it's going to give them more comfort, more openness through that conversation, etc.
And let's dive into the C styles, C persona buyers. So tell us about C's. I know C's are challenging, especially in technical sales, because there's a lot of information that they require. Tell me what your thoughts are when it comes to selling to C's.
Yeah, I think the big thing about C is again task oriented, introverted, and I always say that you're an accountant is like a poster child for a C type
Yeah,
person. Doesn't mean every accountant is a C. Doesn't mean every C is an accountant, right? But just that data driven, very precise, rule following, black, white, right and wrong kind of person, right? So the one thing that I always keep with me in my head about a C is the C wants to answer the question why, right? So if you're working with a C, you better have your ducks in a row, your I's dotted, your T's crossed, and you better have the information that you need to answer any why question that a C person might ask. One of the things that we talked about with S's is their stability, routine. Their biggest fear is change, and C can be very similar to that. They also process things cerebrally. They take a lot of time to make sure they've got everything right because they don't want to make a mistake. So they're going to take as much time as they need to get all the data that they need, get all their ducks in a row before they make that decision. But if you can effectively answer why, they'll change like that, right? Because they have the data, they have the information, they have the material that's going to answer in facts, not in emotion or not in hearsay or not in subjectivity, right? And so when I'm working with a C, I know that they need the details. They're going to need the lower level of stuff, and if I can provide that to them, and if they can answer their own why, I'm halfway there.
absolutely. Oh yeah, 100%. And C's are they've got a hunter instinct in them. I agree 100%. Once they get that moment of clarity of why they should change and why they should do it differently, they'll go down that path. And so I agree 100%. Greg, this has been great. Listen, it's the time for me to ask you, what is your secret sauce for selling?
I got to tell you, my secret sauce for selling is what we just talked about. I'm not kidding you with you, James. Disc has really made a significant life impact for me. I've been in sales all my life. I was never really aware of Disc or Myers Briggs until later in my career. It's specifically after getting into Sandler. And once you can see the power, and it's not an abusive power, it's an enlightening, it takes the subconscious conscious, right? It makes it intentional. And it is a game changer. It's impacted how I sell and my success in selling to the nth degree. And honestly, more important, it's made me a better husband, better father, just a better person in general when I just start to understand that not everybody's like me, and that's okay.
That's awesome. Yeah, Carl Jung, he was the based on his studies, disc has come to be. He has this quote I love to use. He said, "Until you turn your subconscious into your conscious, it will control your life, and you will call it fate." I'll say it again. Until you turn your subconscious into your conscious, it will control your life, and you will call it fate. And Greg, it sounds
Absolutely.
like you got it. You got that figured out. Greg, I know you'd like to do a lot of different things in your spare time. Tell us about your hobby.
I got lots of them, but I would say I have a fun little side gig that I do evenings and weekends, actually, even for some clients too. Because I have a business called Craft Tastings, and basically I do craft beer and whiskey pairing events for people. So I will pair beer with chocolate, beer with cheese, beer with bacon, beer with sausage, beer with popcorn, and I'll do all the exact same things. And I will pair whiskeys and bourbons with some of the same things as well. And then we will also cross pair stuff together. So I've always enjoyed some of those things and create a little business out of it. So that's a little fun thing I do on the side.
That's awesome. And just from a behavioral perspective, do you find that there are certain people that like a certain type of pairing, or is it really kind of seasonal?
It is very individual. Taste is super subjective, right? So what I might like, you might hate, and vice versa, right? So it really is just a matter of now. So there's no
Just like
difference in
just
in,
like
in this
this.
with that, but watching somebody go through a pairing and how talkative or not talkative they are, I can tell like that what somebody's disc style is just by them attending one of my tasting events.
Yeah, be aware. Be aware. I think sellers, it's just be aware. Just watch them. Be aware. I think as sellers, we need to be more aware.
Well, and
Less
James,
self-centered, more other centered.
and it reminds me of one of you mentioned Carl's quote there. Um, One of my other favorite quotes is from Jay Danzy. Your smile is your logo. Your personality is your business card. How you leave others feeling after having an experience with you becomes your trademark. That to me is what this stuff is all about, right? It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about how I'm going to make you feel after we have an engagement together.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Greg, on a last note, is there anything you're doing, you're reading, listening to? I've had people share shows on TV, movies, books, podcasts, anything you're listening to or watching or reading these days that you would like to pass on to listeners, something that can enhance them and empower them.
Yeah, I've got. Hold on. Hold on. The one I'm reading now, which he was recently at our Sandler Summit. It's a book called "Be Yourself Now." Ben Hardy. So I don't know. He was a speaker at the summit, or whatever. But regardless of him being a speaker, this book talks about your future self. It's a pretty powerful book.
Yeah, you're not the first who's recommended that book. So, listeners, if you're subscribing, you've heard this before. Go and get the book. Go and get that book. And another one pops to mind. Hamish Knox. I think he suggested "Surrounded by Idiots." Did you read that one?
I've not read that one.
That's a disc right there.
Okay,
Worth
I'll have to
worth
write that one
worth
down.
worth checking it out. Yeah, perfect. Greg, thank you so much. I appreciate your insight. This has been great. Just so much information, and it's important to constantly be reminded to be other centered. And so, thank
I
you so much.
appreciate the invitation.
My pleasure. Thank you. And to listeners and viewers, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and maybe even share this episode with your friends, family, colleagues, your fellow sellers. And remember, whatever you do, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, and be good to yourself, be good to your prospects and to your customers. And no guts, no gain. Good selling. I'll see you next time.